August 2025 marks patch 11.2 of World of Warcraft, The War Within, and we're back in space. Or something like that.
I'm escaping. One place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
More importantly than that, we get a cloak. But not just any cloak. This is the cloak. The cloak is good. You want the cloak. You need the cloak. Let the cloak embrace you. Because if you don't breathe deeply of the cloak, then you can't do the raid. So please, embrace the cloak. Back in summer of 2022, the Dragonflight expansion for WoW was coming soon rather than having been and gone, and local elitist jerk Ian Hazakostas was doing the rounds and spreading the good news all about it. During a conversation with Hazelnutty Games, Ian mentioned that the new talent trees that were coming in with Dragonflight were designed with a bit of future-proofing in mind that could be added to and changed, and so on and so forth. He mentioned during this conversation as well that this wouldn't mark the end of borrowed power as a concept within the game. We'd still be seeing it, just hopefully not as over the top as how it had been in Legion and Battle for Azeroth and that other expansion that came out before Dragonflight. You might be wondering what borrowed power even is, which is fine. It's one of those phrases that's been used so often, it's kind of lost a lot of its original meaning, and, a bit of definition never hurt anybody. Merriam-Webster and the Oxford English Dictionary define borrowed power as get a grip. We're not using dictionary definitions around here, that would be insane, you basket case. No time for that. Borrowed power is something in a video game that makes your character temporarily stronger. And actually defining it as a general term is super whatever because it changes based on the context of game, time of day, and whether or not Mercury is in retrograde at any given moment. So instead, here's some examples. Roguelikes are basically built around borrowed power. In the course of a run of, say, Rogue Legacy 2, you can come across a multitude of relics, some of which are ridiculously strong and can really define what direction you end up taking. For the most part, a successful run of Rogue Legacy 2 involves exploring the whole map, finding as many relics as you can, and then engaging in a boss rush towards the end. Regardless of whether or not you succeed or fail, once the run is over, all of the relics are gone and you're back to square one. Another example of what could potentially be borrowed power, but in my opinion isn't, is the tadpole in Baldur's Gate 3, or wishing that you perhaps had embraced the tadpole in Baldur's Gate 3.
You know what that offer truly entails, don't you? Become half a mind flayer, lose half of yourself. I don't want that.
If you embrace the tadpole, your character gets a lot of extra bonuses, some of which are quite powerful. If you don't embrace the tadpole, then no bonuses for you, but at least you won't look like the aftermath of the Druid camp in a Dark Urge playthrough. I'd say that this isn't borrowed power, because the tadpole is permanent, and it's a choice. As a game system, it works in Baldur's Gate 3 because that is predominantly a role-playing game. If you choose not to engage with the tadpole, then you can still finish the game, you can still succeed in combat, and perhaps most importantly of all, you'll look damn good doing it.
You absolute horror!
You could also argue that not using relics in Rogue Legacy 2 is a choice, and whilst you'd technically be right, nobody wants to talk to you because people who are technically right are almost always boring. So what about World of Warcraft? Well, there are several iterations of borrowed power active at any given time. Your character might have a crumb of stats here and there, but with no gear, they're not going to be attacking and killing chaos anytime soon. Slap some gear on there though, and all of a sudden they can do some real work. Contrary to what a lot of WoW players think, gear is also entirely ephemeral. You get it, you use it, you will eventually replace it. Kinda not worth losing sleep over, all said and done. I would go as far as saying that gear is just borrowed power distilled into its purest essence, and it's one that this and so many other games have as a sort of default. But what else? Talents, too. The talent system in World of Warcraft is customizable power depending on your needs. For example, on my Evoker, I might specialize into Terror of the Skies when I'm doing a Mythic Plus, but I absolutely don't need that when I'm fighting a raid boss. Might not even need it in certain Mythic Plus dungeons, depending on how high the key level is and whether or not something else might be more useful. Another example on the Evoker again would be if I was a bad Evoker. I would specialise in Recall, but I'm not a bad Evoker, so I don't. So the next time that you're in a bit of a slap fight with someone over which game is better, World of Warcraft Retail or Classic, and they pull out the borrowed power card, you can hit them back with that trap card and become the true Yu-Gi-Oh! You were always meant to be.
Not so fast, Yugi!
my face down card!
That's not Lifesaver!
So, okay. Job done, right? Borrowed power is inevitable in World of Warcraft. Two of the core systems the game has been built around have been there since Dirge Spam and Trade Trap was still funny. Time for some context around why this was such a hot-button topic coming from Shadowlands and into Dragonflight. See, Shadowlands kind of hit the logical endpoint of what borrowed power could be in a lot of different ways. There were 4 choices you could make in Shadowlands between what were called covenants. Becoming friends with terminally online vampires, irritating pixies, boring angel guys, or oiled-up manly wrestlers was presented as a real choice that players would make as part of the storyline of the Shadowlands expansion. You and your new friends would go about doing things and presumably make your parents proud or something. Except it wasn't a choice at all. Not really. Every covenant had something to offer in the form of an additional ability and one of several different talent trees. Of course, some were just naturally better for certain classes and specs than others. Druids wanted to be friends with the pixies because they'd get access to Convoke the Spirits, a spell which was stupid good for their balance spec in particular. Paladins wanted to be friends with the boring angels because that gave them access to one of the best abilities introduced in the game to this day, Divine Toll. Rogues wanted to be friends with nobody because all of their choices kind of sucked. And sure, you could be kind of effective if you picked the wrong covenant for your class and spec, but you wouldn't be as effective as someone who'd chosen wisely. Some specs were just flat out worse to play if they didn't have the correct covenant. This stuff really plagued Shadowlands, and I feel like I can make a pretty accurate sweeping generalization here. None of the 27 people still playing World of Warcraft during that expansion enjoyed it. If a patch changed the way that things were balanced, you had to change covenants, and that required busy work. Did you really like the aesthetic of the oiled-up manly dead wrestlers? That's cool, but you're a fire mage, mate, so it's off to fairyland with you. Oh, you're a protection paladin? You'll be friends with the boring angels and you'll damn well like it. What was originally presented and indeed marketed as a choice was no choice at all. You might stot about with a suboptimal choice on an alt, but that kind of defeats the purpose of the role-playing aspect that was part of the marketing to begin with. All this was combined with the fact that you had to choose. You'll notice that there's not a valid 5th option saying, choose no friends, become Batman. So, coming from all that, plus Legion and Battle for Azeroth having their artifact grinds meant that players were kind of rightfully done with borrowed power for a bit. And let me tell you, Dragonflight launched in November of 2022. We had new talent trees, new bits of gear to collect. Tier sets had made a return in the final raid of Shadowlands and were back in full for Dragonflight. And while there were a lot of new factions to meet and bear asses to collect, none of them provided a significant boost to your effectiveness. That was left to the gear and talents to sort out. And oh yeah, I mentioned tier sets there. They're borrowed power too. They're also a topic for another day. For now, just know that they exist and you should fear them. To the point of all this, Dragonflight was here and everything had returned back to normal. Now we could finally play the game. Anyway, 4 months later, in March of 2023, patch 10.07 released, and the first crumb of borrowed power was back in the game. This time in the form of the Onyx Amulet? It was a ring. It was a ring that could be equated with a bunch of additional effects. Nothing particularly groundbreaking. In fact, I distinctly remember at the time, I said, this ring does nothing for me, therefore I'm not going to log in and get it. And I would describe the Onyx Amulet as a crumb of borrowed power, because really it was just catch-up gear with extra steps. Blizzard seemed to like the implementation of it, but we wouldn't really see anything similar for a long while. In fact, the remainder of Dragonflight was largely untouched by anything resembling the Onyx Amulet. Seasons 2, 3, and 4 of the expansion were just us, our gear, our talents, and our tier sets, and our flight stones, and our crests. I'm wondering which wonderful human being was going to fail the flight section on Tindril this week.
Then everyone needs to quickly fly after the boss, dodging the fire orbs along the way, and flying through the green orbs to give the entire raid a stacking damage buff.
Moving on. The War Within released, and there are a bunch of new talents to be dealing with in the form of hero talents, which are basically just regular talents, except it's like a spec within a spec. They're cool, actually. I like them a lot. For all intents and purposes, though, it was just more options in the talent trees, and so I just kind of see them as an extension of that system, honestly. And then, patch 11.07 released. and with it came another ring. This time, Cirque's Circlet, which is also very easy to say. Patch 11.1.7 released, and this time we got a belt. At the time, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this might just be the new thing going forward. Any 0.7 patch would include a catch-up mechanic for players in the form of an item that could be considered as borrowed power. I think, as an implementation, having something like this form the backbone of the late season catch-up is pretty solid. There are already several catch-up mechanics in place that act to make characters stronger over time in a passive manner, so an additional surge that an item such as the long name belt could give is coming in at the right time. That could help push people over the line that have maybe been struggling with the content now for several months. But now 11.2's arrived, and we have the cloak. The cloak is designed to get stronger over time, and does stuff that is pretty typical of borrowed power in the modern game. It's also entirely mandatory if you intend to breathe the same air as the raid instance this patch. You literally can't get in without it. And it's a minor point, but I'm going to loop back to it anyway, which is the problem of choice. Baldur's Gate 3 has borrowed power system that isn't one because it gives you a choice in whether or not to use it. Whenever World of Warcraft introduces something like this, it tends not to be a choice at all. But that isn't really what the title of this video is, and it isn't why I think borrowed power is an inevitability in the game either. If we take a look at the gear upgrade path for a character across seasons 1 to 3 in both Dragonflight and the War Within, there's something pretty stupid going on, and it has a pretty nasty impact. At the end of season 1 of Dragonflight, a fully decked out character who had mythic gear in every slot and was clearly just the dog's bollocks would be hovering around an average eye level of about 424. By the end of Season 3, that same character could potentially go up to 494. Season 1 of The War Within would have our same big lad there finish up with an average of around about 636. At the end of Season 3 of The War Within, we're looking at an average of around about 720. You might be thinking to yourself, hey man, stop throwing numbers at me. So I'll simplify that down. Difference in how strong a character is at the beginning of an expansion and at the end of an expansion is quite significant. Quite significant indeed. And the trick to all this is in the secondary stats, more than anything else. Haste, critical strike, mastery, versatility if you're weird. As I'm talking right now, at the very beginning of The War Within Season 3, my Evoker has 34% in the crit and mastery columns, which is very upsetting because I need to switch my focus entirely to haste this season and I've got a lot of work to do. But that's besides the point. No, the point is that those numbers will be even higher than they currently are by the end of Season 3. And then the nasty bit. There'll be a new expansion, and I'll level that character and lose all those bonuses, as is tradition. As a result, my character will feel like a proper turd, comparatively speaking. Honestly, I think one of the worst feelings in the game is leveling up in a new expansion, especially if the character you're leveling is in endgame gear of the expansion you're leaving behind. With each level, you become increasingly weaker, and then you spend the first season of the new expansion feeling worse than you did before the new content was pumped into your veins. This is made a lot worse by the ocean of difference between average item level that a character has at the beginning of an expansion compared to the end of it. But characters need to get stronger over time for things to remain fun. The number must go up, and we spend a lot more time at level cap than we do in the doldrums of leveling up. But I would say that this is the gap that borrowed power actually does a good job of filling. I'd be a lot less irritated by losing my ability to cast 17 Ice Lances a second if it meant that every other glacial spike was imbued with the power of Jeff Goldblum eating hot wings.
I just got 2 chills, you saw.
All said, borrowed power is creeping back into the game, primarily in the form of the items I've mentioned up to this point. While it's far too early to start thinking about what might be in place in Midnight, the upcoming expansion, in terms of how players will be able to feel stronger than they do at present, I do have a feeling that there's going to be something driving that forward. And I'm fine with that, but what I'd like to see is a continuation of this more cautious approach that Blizzard's had during the experimentation that they've had with specific items and things like that being handed out towards the end of each season. The renowned tracks for the raid instances that we've seen for Undermine and Manaforge Omega have been really good implementations of borrowed power increasing over time as well. You're rewarded with more passive strength by participating in the activity. That's cool. In contrast to that, however, I think the mid-season turbo boost, as they called it, that we had in Season 2 of The War Within was pretty terrible. It warped the difficulty tiering of the entire season and made the game a little bit harder to come back to or, heaven forbid, start fresh in. fact, there's words to be said about the way difficulty is presented and managed in the game, but much like talking about tier sets, that subject is in another castle. One way or the other, borrowed power isn't something I think will ever go away, and the truth is it can't. It's too baked into the core of the way the game worked and has worked since time immemorial, and that's okay. That cautious approach, touch of nuance, and time gating that we've seen examples of is pretty positive in terms of the direction that borrowed power in World of Warcraft will continue to go. At least I think so. And yeah, I did just say that there's such a thing as positive time gating. Go fuck yourself. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here, and I'm very glad to have had your company. Let me know down below if you have any examples of things I missed, or forgot about, or if you disagree with me. I'm all for a bit of the old mind changing. I do video game stuff on this channel, I do politics stuff on another channel, and I also do stuff on Twitch. Thank you again for watching, and I hope that you have an enchanted day.